Hey there, this is Conflict Tales. Buckle up, because today's story is packed with drama, conflict, and shocking turns. The homeowner association just declared that my private ranch road belongs to the neighborhood, and I had no right to block it. That was the moment I realized I was in for the fight of my life. I moved to this rural town for peace and quiet, leaving behind the chaos of city life. My ranch, spanning several acres, had been in my family for generations. It wasn't much, just a modest house, a barn, and a few fenced areas for my cattle. The best part? It had a long gravel driveway leading directly to the main road, a route I used daily to transport feed and supplies. But what I didn't realize was that for years, the previous owners had unknowingly allowed the road to become an unofficial shortcut for the neighborhood. Cars, delivery trucks, even school buses occasionally cut through my land instead of using the main streets. I wasn't thrilled about it, but at first I figured it wasn't worth stirring up trouble. Then the problem started. Some drivers sped through, kicking up dust that coated my house and terrified my livestock. Others carelessly tossed trash onto my property. My fences were hit twice by distracted drivers cutting too close to the edge. I caught local teenagers joyriding on my land at night. And the final straw? One of my heifers got loose when someone left the gate open, nearly causing a collision on the main road. That's when I knew something had to change. I put up a sturdy gate at the entrance to my driveway with a sign: Private property. No trespassing. The first day, I watched through my window as a few confused drivers slowed down, read the sign, and reluctantly turned around. By the third day, I found my gate wide open, the lock broken, and tire tracks leading through my property. Someone had taken it upon themselves to fix the inconvenience. That's when I met Karen. She showed up unannounced, arms crossed, lips pursed, standing at my gate as if she had the authority to reprimand me. "You can't do this," she huffed, blonde hair bouncing as she gestured at my locked entrance. "This road has always been open to the community." I stared at her, trying to process her nerve. "No, ma'am. This is my land and I have every right to control who drives through it." She scoffed. "You're being selfish. The whole neighborhood relies on this road. You can't just cut everyone off." I wasn't in the mood for a debate. "There's a public street 2 blocks over. That's what roads are for." She narrowed her eyes. "We'll see about that." I didn't think much of her threat until the letter from the homeowner association arrived. I wasn't even a member of the HOA. My ranch was technically outside the neighborhood boundaries. But that didn't stop them from sending a formal notice claiming my road was a historical access point for the community and that blocking it violated local ordinances. If I didn't remove my gate immediately, they threatened me with fines and legal action. I contacted a lawyer. Turns out my land had never been designated as public property. There was no legal easement, no agreement, no documentation proving that anyone had the right to cross it without my permission. The HOA had no case, so I ignored their letter and reinforced my gate with stronger locks and security cameras. The next morning, I woke up to find my lock cut again, my sign spray-painted over with the words "Community Road." My blood boiled. I checked my cameras and saw 2 men from the HOA committee, Jeffrey Bloom, the head of the association, and some other guy I didn't recognize, marching onto my property in the dead of night, breaking my lock and pulling my gate open. They walked through as if they owned the place, nodding in approval before driving away. I took the footage to the sheriff's office. That's when I met Officer Ryan Becker, a local cop who seemed sympathetic. "This isn't the first time we've had HOA disputes," he admitted, watching the footage. "They push their luck, but breaking and entering, that's a crime." But before I could press charges, another officer entered the room. Officer Tracy Miller. She glanced at the screen, then at me, her expression unreadable. "You sure you want to go down this road?" she asked. "Jeffrey Bloom has a lot of influence in this town. It might be easier to just work something out." I clenched my fists. "They broke onto my property. I want them charged." Becker nodded. "We'll investigate." But nothing happened. Days passed, and the sheriff's department never followed up. Meanwhile, things escalated. My mailbox was smashed. Someone poured nails at my driveway entrance. My cattle feed storage was mysteriously left open one night, and I found several bags slashed open, grain spilling onto the ground. It was clear. This wasn't just about a road. This was about control. The HOA and their loyal followers wanted me to back down, and they were willing to play dirty. Then the police showed up at my door, this time responding to a complaint against me. Karen stood beside Officer Miller, looking smug. "He threatened me with a gun," she declared, loud enough for my neighbors to hear. "I was just trying to talk to him and he waved a rifle at me." I stared at her, stunned. "That's a lie." Officer Miller didn't seem to care. "We'll need to check your firearms, Mr. Harris." I didn't resist. I let them inspect my rifles, knowing full well I hadn't used them outside of hunting season. But the accusation was enough. It didn't matter if there was no proof. I was now the guy who threatened a neighbor. As they left, Karen smirked. "You should just take the gate down. Save yourself the trouble." I realized then that this wasn't going to stop. They weren't just trying to use my land. They were trying to take it. And if they thought I was going to roll over, they had another thing coming. I wasn't about to let them win. The moment Karen and Officer Miller left, I called my lawyer and sent him all the camera footage of the HOA trespassing on my property. He assured me that legally I had every right to restrict access to my land, and the HOA had no claim over it. But he also warned me they weren't going to back down easily. The next morning, I reinforced the gate yet again, this time installing an even heavier-duty lock and adding an additional security camera to cover blind spots. That same afternoon, I got a call from Officer Ryan Becker. "Listen, Tom," he said in a low voice. "I don't like what's happening, but you need to know that Bloom and Miller are working behind the scenes to build a case against you. They're talking about filing an injunction to have the road declared a public easement." I exhaled sharply. "On what grounds? There's no record of this ever being a public road." "Doesn't matter," Becker muttered. "They're claiming historical use. It's a long shot, but if they get enough neighbors to back them up, a judge might force you to open it." That was the last straw. That night I met with my neighbor Gary, the only one in the area who had supported me from the start. "They won't stop until they get what they want," I told him as we sat on his porch. "I need to find something, anything, that will prove they're full of it." Gary scratched his chin. "What about old land records, survey maps? Something that shows that road was never supposed to be public?" It was a solid idea. The next morning, I drove 2 towns over to the county records office. I spent hours digging through dusty files, old maps, and property deeds. And then I found it. A land survey from 50 years ago that explicitly marked my driveway as private property. But that wasn't all. I found another document, an old HOA agreement from decades ago that showed they had tried and failed to claim my land before. The kicker: the original HOA bylaws clearly stated they had no jurisdiction over properties outside their designated neighborhood. My land had never been part of the HOA, and they had no legal right to enforce anything on it. Armed with that knowledge, I met with my lawyer again. "This is what we need," he said, flipping through the pages. "They've been bluffing this whole time." That night, I slept better than I had in weeks, but my peace didn't last long. The next morning, I woke up to find my security camera wires cut and my mailbox completely smashed. Footprints led straight to my gate, and sure enough, the lock had been cut again. I clenched my jaw, rage boiling in my chest. Someone had gotten desperate, and I had a pretty good idea who. Just as I was processing the damage, a black SUV rolled up to my driveway, and out stepped Jeffrey Bloom himself, flanked by 2 other HOA board members. He strolled up to me like he owned the place. "Morning, Mr. Harris," he said, way too smug for my liking. "Looks like you've been having some trouble with vandalism. Maybe if you let us help manage the road, we could keep an eye on things for you." I crossed my arms. "Cut the crap, Bloom. You and I both know who's behind this, and I have proof that you've been lying about your authority over my land." His smirk faltered for just a second. Now. No need to make baseless accusations. We're all just trying to keep the neighborhood running smoothly. That's why I wanted to give you one final offer. Let the roads stay open and we'll drop all legal actions against you. Otherwise, he spread his hands. I can't guarantee things won't get even messier. My blood ran cold. That was a threat, plain and simple. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. I suggest you get off my property before I call the sheriff and show him footage of you trespassing last week. Bloom's expression hardened. He gave me one last lingering look before turning on his heel. Have it your way, he said, getting back into his SUV. But don't say I didn't warn you. As I watched them drive away, I realized something chilling. This wasn't just about a road anymore. This was about power, control, and intimidation. And they weren't going to stop until they either broke me or I broke them first. I wasn't going to sit back and wait for them to make the next move. The moment Bloom and his cronies drove off, I went inside and called my lawyer. They just showed up here, made veiled threats, and acted like they own my land. How much longer do I have to put up with this? He sighed on the other end. We've got enough now to take them to court for harassment, trespassing, and attempted property fraud. But if we go that route, you need to be ready for them to retaliate. I clenched my jaw. They already have. Someone cut my security wires last night and smashed my mailbox. This isn't just legal pressure anymore. They're trying to scare me into backing down. There was a pause. All right, we'll file the lawsuit by the end of the week, but you need to document everything. Every incident, every conversation, every threat. If they escalate, you call the sheriff immediately. That night, I set up brand new security cameras, this time with hidden backup power sources and cloud storage. If they tried to sabotage my system again, I'd have proof. But what I wasn't expecting was just how fast they'd strike back. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my cattle bellowing. Running outside, I found the main gate to my grazing field wide open. Several of my cows had wandered dangerously close to the road. I sprinted to corral them back inside, my heart pounding. Someone had done this on purpose. As I secured the gate, Gary pulled up in his truck, his face set in a hard frown. "You see the new flyers around town?" he asked, handing me one through the window. My stomach twisted as I read it. "Community emergency meeting. The dangerous actions of Thomas Harris. Help keep our roads safe." Below that was a grainy, zoomed-in photo of me standing by my locked gate, arms crossed. The text painted me as an aggressive outsider trying to cut off historical access to the neighborhood. My blood boiled. They're turning the whole town against me. Gary nodded grimly. "It's worse than that. I overheard some of the HOA board members at the diner this morning. They're pushing to get the county involved, trying to classify your road as a public necessity. If that happens, they could force you to grant public access, even without your consent." My hands clenched into fists. So now they're trying to steal my land legally since intimidation didn't work. He sighed. "Looks that way. I wasn't about to let them manipulate the system. I spent the rest of the day gathering everything I had. Documents proving my property was private, historical records showing the road was never public, and copies of every letter and threat they had sent me. When I got back inside, I found a message waiting on my phone. "Hey, this is Becker. You need to be careful. Someone on the inside told me that HOA is trying to use an old emergency response law to declare your road as an essential access route. If they convince the county, they could bypass a lawsuit and take this straight to the state level." I stared at the message, my pulse pounding. "How the hell do I stop that?" I texted back. He responded almost immediately. "We need evidence that they're manipulating the process. If we can prove their petition is fraudulent, the county won't touch it. You find anything shady, you call me first." That night, I didn't sleep. I scoured through public records, old HOA meeting minutes, anything I could get my hands on. And then, at around 3 in the morning, I found something. A signed document from 10 years ago, a failed attempt by the HOA to force a previous owner into granting a road easement. It was nearly identical to the one they were trying now. Except back then, the county had ruled against them, and the person who had signed that document on behalf of the HOA? Jeffrey Bloom. I stared at the screen, my heart racing. They had already lost this battle once. They were just hoping no one would remember. I printed everything, making several copies. By sunrise, I was on my way to the county office. If they wanted to play dirty, fine. But I was about to show them that I played to win. The county clerk's office was quiet when I arrived just after sunrise, the air still cool from the night. I pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped inside, my file of documents clutched in my hand like a shield. The clerk, an older woman with glasses perched on her nose, barely looked up as I approached. "I need to submit a formal complaint regarding fraudulent petitioning by the Homeowner Association," I said, placing my file on the counter. She sighed, adjusting her glasses. "And you have evidence of this?" I nodded, flipping open the folder. "These are historical records proving that the HOA already tried, and failed, to claim my land a decade ago. And here, you'll see how they're recycling the same argument, hoping no one catches on." She peered at the documents, her expression shifting. "I'll have to bring this to the county supervisor. This might take some time." I exhaled, knowing that time was exactly what I didn't have. As I left the office, my phone buzzed. It was Becker. "Harris, you need to get back to your property, now." My stomach clenched. "What happened?" His voice was tight. "The HOA called in a private construction crew. They're trying to pave the road through your land before the county can make a ruling." My vision went red. "They can't legally do that." Becker sighed. "They're gambling that by the time you stop them, the work will be too far along for the county to bother reversing it. Get home now." I broke every speed limit on the way back. As I rounded the final bend to my ranch, my worst fears were confirmed. Heavy machinery was already on my land. A bulldozer was cutting a wide strip through my fence line, and a group of men in reflective vests stood watching, as if they had every right to be there. I slammed on the brakes, barely throwing the truck into park before jumping out. "Hey, get your damn machines off my land!" One of the workers turned, giving me a bored look. "We have orders from the HOA. They told us this was community property." My fists clenched. "That's a lie. This land is private and you are trespassing. Now get the hell out before I call the sheriff." The worker hesitated, but then a familiar voice cut through the noise. "You're making a mistake, Mr. Harris." Jeffrey Bloom stood near the work site, his hands in his pockets, watching me like a vulture eyeing roadkill. "You can't win this," he said smoothly. "Even if the county rules against us, by then the road will already be built. The town will see it as necessary infrastructure, and no judge will order its removal." My breath came hard and fast, my rage barely contained. "You're going to regret this, Bloom," he smirked. "I doubt it." Before I could respond, another vehicle pulled up, Becker's patrol car. He stepped out, hand already on his belt. "I suggest you shut down this operation," Becker said, his voice carrying over the sound of the machines. "Immediately." Bloom's smirk faltered for just a second before he regained his composure. "We have the authority to—" Becker cut him off. "You have nothing. You're trespassing on private property, and I have full authority to detain every single one of you if you don't stop right now." The workers exchanged nervous glances. One by one, they shut down their machines. Bloom's hands curled into fists, but he didn't argue. He turned on his heel and walked away. But I knew this wasn't over. That night, my ranch felt more like a war zone than a home. Every light was on, my cameras fully operational, my shotgun within arm's reach. Gary came over, his own rifle slung over his shoulder. "You know they're not done, right?" he said as he took a seat on my porch. I nodded, watching the dark expanse of my land. "Yeah, but I'm not backing down." He clapped me on the shoulder. "Good, because neither am I." 2 nights later, they made their next move. It started small. The power to my barn was cut, plunging my property into darkness. Then I heard the distant sound of tires crunching over gravel. Someone was on my land. I grabbed my rifle and stepped outside, Gary close behind me. We moved cautiously, flashlight scanning the darkness. Then a flicker of movement near my cattle pen. I raised my gun. "Whoever you are, you better come out now." Silence. then a low chuckle. "You really think you can scare us off, Harris?" My blood ran cold. I recognized that voice. Jeffrey Bloom stepped into the light, hands raised, a twisted grin on his face. "This land doesn't belong to you anymore," he said. "It belongs to the community, and one way or another, we're going to take it." I tightened my grip on my rifle. Over my dead body. The night air was thick with tension. I kept my rifle steady, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. Gary stood beside me, his own weapon held tight. Bloom's smirk never wavered as he took another step forward, making sure he was just inside the beam of my flashlight. "Put the gun down, Harris. You don't want to do anything stupid." I didn't move. "You're trespassing, and after tonight, you better believe I'll be pressing charges." Bloom chuckled. "Go ahead. By the time anything comes of it, this land won't even be yours anymore." Gary's grip tightened. "You better start explaining yourself, fast." Bloom glanced toward the darkness beyond my cattle pen. "We've already filed an emergency petition with the county. By morning, they'll issue a temporary access order. By the time you fight it, we'll have the road paved and in use." I felt a surge of anger, but I kept my voice calm. "And you think that gives you the right to send people onto my land in the middle of the night?" Bloom shrugged. "Just making sure you don't do something reckless. The town's behind us, Harris. Even the sheriff won't protect you forever." I exhaled slowly, then took a step closer. "You're done here. Get off my land before Becker gets here and hauls you in." Bloom's smile finally faded. He stared at me for a long moment, then turned and disappeared into the shadows. A few moments later, I heard car engines rumble to life in the distance. Gary lowered his rifle but kept his eyes on the dark. "This isn't over." I nodded. "No. But now I know how far they're willing to go." The next morning, I was at the county courthouse before they even opened. My lawyer met me outside, already holding a stack of papers. "They did file an emergency petition," he confirmed, "but there's something weird. The document is missing key approvals. No county inspector signed off on this." I frowned. "So it's not legally enforceable?" He shook his head. "Not yet. But if they get a judge to sign an emergency injunction, it'll be a lot harder to fight." That's when Becker called. "Harris, you need to get back to your ranch. Now." I could tell by his tone something was wrong. "What happened?" There was a pause. "Your barn is on fire." My stomach dropped. I ran to my truck and peeled out of the parking lot, my tires screeching as I raced back home. Smoke was already visible on the horizon by the time I reached the property. Flames licked at the side of my barn, thick black smoke pouring into the sky. Gary and a few neighbors were already there trying to control the blaze with hoses. I jumped out of my truck and sprinted toward them. "The livestock!" "Already out," Gary shouted, "but we're losing the building." Becker pulled up seconds later, his siren wailing. He barely had time to put the car in park before he was running toward me. "We've got a problem." "No kidding," I snapped. "Someone torched my barn." He shook his head. "That's not all. We caught one of the guys who did it." I blinked. "What?" Becker nodded toward his patrol car where a man sat in the back seat, cuffed. "He was trying to sneak away through the brush. Says he was hired." My blood ran cold. "By who?" Becker hesitated. "He won't say yet, but we found an HOA meeting schedule in his truck." I clenched my fists. That's enough for me. The fire raged for another hour before we finally got it under control. The barn was a total loss. I stood there staring at the charred remains, feeling a deep, burning fury settle into my gut. Gary put a hand on my shoulder. "We have to hit them where it hurts." I nodded. "We're taking this to the state attorney. If the county won't act, we'll go higher." Over the next few days, my lawyer compiled every shred of evidence we had. Trespassing, arson, fraud, illegal petitioning. Meanwhile, Becker worked behind the scenes, pressing his suspect for more information. Finally, we got a break. The arsonist cracked. He admitted that Bloom and several HOA board members had paid him to set the fire. They wanted to intimidate me into backing down before the county hearing. Becker took the information straight to the district attorney. Within 24 hours, a warrant was issued for Bloom's arrest. The next morning, I stood at the edge of my property as sheriff's deputies arrived at Bloom's house. They led him out in cuffs, his face twisted with rage. As they pushed him into the back of a cruiser, he locked eyes with me. "You think this is over," he growled. "You haven't won." I smirked. "We'll see." By the end of the week, the emergency petition was dismissed. The county opened a full investigation into the HOA's dealings. Several board members resigned in disgrace. The town, once divided, turned against them. And my land? It remained mine, untouchable, just as it always should have been. Gary stood next to me, watching the last of the police cars pull away. So, what now? I looked out over my ranch, taking in the blackened barn, the repaired fences, the quiet stretch of road that once caused so much trouble. "Now," I said, exhaling, "we rebuild.